Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're going to get started here. So what does fraud look like in an A&E firms is our topic today. I'm Kaitlyn Axenfeld. I'm an audit partner here at Dannible McKee. I specialize in construction, architect, and engineering firms, attest services, and I have a specialization in fraud and forensics as well. The slides and presentation will be recorded and provided afterwards, so feel free to ask any questions as you go within the chat. We'll try to answer them as best as we can. If we don't get to them, we will get back to you. But yeah, so we'll get started. So I'm going to start talking about fraud in the A&E industry, and kind of the gateway and the topic to start talking about is the ACFE's report to the nations. This is an annual report. The 2024 report is actually the 13th edition. It's based on, 1,900 real cases of fraud across the world, 22 major industry categories, and it explores the costs, schemes, victims, and perpetrators of fraud committed during the year period. So this is some good resources as a fraud examiner and as we look at fraud in all different industries. So you'll see infographics included throughout that kind of shows the statistics behind some of what I'm talking about today. So fraud is up on average about 24%. The study was based on occupational fraud committed by organizations' employees. So the median loss per case during the period was 145,000. With the highest instance of fraud about 750,000. So why do people commit fraud? You kind of always have to go back and revisit the fraud triangle. Pressure, rationalization, opportunity. This is the most widely accepted explanation of why some people commit fraud and is known as the fraud triangle. So we'll go into each one and look at each individual component a little bit more. So motivation is the incentive or pressure to commit fraud. Some motivations include sudden or overwhelming expenses, medical bills, debt, unexpected dip in income, frustration with your current job or expectations. Employees are struggling to make ends meet, change in lifestyle, living beyond one's means. So what creates that motivation for people to then commit fraud? And then you also have to have opportunity, right? A chance to commit the fraud without being caught. No one would commit fraud if they thought they'd be caught and end up in jail, right? There's always that feeling that you can get away with it. So is fraud oversight absent, unenforced, ineffective, or unmonitored? Management that doesn't promote integrity and honesty. Are there weak internal control policies, a lack of oversight? What is the stuff within an organization that provides employees this chance? Rationalization, reasoning used to justify the fraud. Everyone skims a little bit. It's okay. You're entitled. There's no real victim here. I'm hurting my organization, but no one's actually getting hurt. Our company is so huge, what I'm taking won't be missed, right? So how do you justify the act of the fraud? The 10-80-10 rule supports the general assumptions of capability by breakdown of the population and likelihood of fraud occurrences. So this says 10% of people will never commit fraud, 80% of people might commit fraud, and 10% of people are actively looking for opportunities to commit fraud. So you're really concerned with that 10% of people, right, that are actively looking for opportunities, or 80% given the right combination that would commit the fraud as well. It's normally well-respected people within an organization. They're 4 times more likely to commit fraud than someone with a lower reputation. The age demographics, 70% with that 36 to 55-year-old. A lot of that is based on those like incentives and pressures, right? So that age group is probably more subject to some of those incentives and pressures than younger or older demographics. Fraud is almost twice as likely to occur in groups, and outside actors of fraud can take many different types. So we're going to get into that a little bit further in the presentation. So when you look at fraud in the architect and engineering industries, it's really two key areas to kind of consider and discuss today. Occupational fraud, highlight on asset misappropriation here, and then cyber fraud. And you kind of see that across industries, size of companies. It doesn't really matter. These are, kind of things that can be applied across, if you're on a nonprofit board, not just your organization. All good things to keep in mind with and monitor. So occupational fraud is a significant threat to small businesses. On here, you can see less than 100 employees. It's about 141,000 of a loss for the median loss. So it's pretty significant when you have that few employees and the size of your organization. Asset misappropriation cases involve an employee stealing or misusing the employee and organization's resources. This is the most common category of occupational fraud and occurs in 89% of the cases. So asset misappropriation, a scheme in which an employee steals or misuses the employing organization's resources. That's the theft of cash on hand, theft of cash receipts, and fraudulent disbursements. And then not really applicable to the A&E industry, there's inventory in all of their assets, right? Maybe you would have some items that could fall under that category, but the biggest threat is really cash, right? And in here we see all of the different schemes and opportunities, right? So you have skimming, straight up larceny, billing schemes, payroll schemes, expense reimbursement schemes, check and payment tampering, and registered disbursements. So all of these represent items that people could target and then use to misappropriate assets in your organization. So cash, the theft of cash on hand, theft of receipts, they're the most costly and the most common type of schemes. Billing schemes was in 22% of the cases in the ACFE study this year, with billing and check and payment tampering schemes at the highest cost for organizations, 155,000 or 100,000. Another common item for A&E firms is expense reports, looking at false receipt documentation, making sure that you're looking at original receipts, and what are the credit card policies in effect at your organization, and how did those get processed and paid? So how do we detect occupational fraud? Occupational fraud is more likely detected by tip than any other method. This kind of goes to that, we'll talk a little bit about fraud prevention and look at controls you can put in place. This is the biggest piece of it, providing employees with an understanding of where and how to report fraud occurring. Most of the tips come from employees of the organization, and over 40% of all cases were actually detected by a tip. So, and then we kind of talk about back on the cyber side of it and managing third-party fraud risks. If you Google A&E firms and fraud, the first article that comes up is actually an article from 2024 about a large multinational design and engineering firm that paid out, I think it was like 25 million to fraudsters. And part of that was they used video call with AI and bad actors to basically fake a video call with high ranking individuals within the organization to then create a payment scheme. So that's an extreme example of loss in this situation and kind of why cyber is still a very big piece of a risk for an A&E firm. So managing third-party fraud risks, cyber risk, we kind of talked about this cybersecurity posture. What are your login and password credentials? It's an opportunity for fraudsters to damage your systems, visibility into your proprietary and confidential information. And so it allows fraudsters to more effectively create social engineered phishing, smishing communications, which increase the likelihood of success. So cyber fraud in today's environment, we have hacking, malware, social engineering, phishing scams, password attacks, software piracy. These are all things that are occurring and are just increasing in activity and volume over the last several years. And we'll kind of go into some of those statistics here. So first, some definitions: cybercrime carried out by means of computer Social engineering, we're going to talk about that. It's the use of deception to manipulate individuals into divulging confidential or personal information. Malware is the software, ransomware software designed to block access to computers. We've all heard a lot about that in the last several years. It does seem like that's on like a little bit of a decline, but you never know. I'm sure there'll be something else to replace it. So know your scams. Each one of these scams is carried out with the goal of tricking the victim into providing information or clicking on a link, which will install malware into their device, carried out by different methods, different targets. They all have a little bit of a different approach, I guess. So phishing is the practice of using deception to get you to reveal personal, sensitive, or confidential information. Here's a really good example of one. The email address from Roadrunner, spelling mistakes throughout, threat of account termination. The address appears where the link, so always hover over a link before you click on it, right? Review the greeting, look at the header, best practices. And all these are education points to make back at your organization too, and make sure that people are aware of the different scams and how they could be targeted. So phishing is a scam carried out via phone. You'd spoof a legitimate number. For the most part, these are more, I think, on the decline. You know, you always be aware, don't give into pressure, don't answer phone calls, stay calm. There's no harm if it's a real phone call to say, let me call you back, and making sure that you dial the actual number of the bank or financial institution potentially that they're trying to get you to provide information for. You know, unsolicited offers for credit and loans, like if you're not reaching out to someone, is that really something that, you know, who initiated the contact, and is that a legitimate source or a legitimate operation? You know, you're going to get a great return on this investment. It's urgent. You must apply, you must give us the information now. So there's a lot of in this area. And even as we look at the integration and where AI is going, and the capability of these fraudsters to kind of take people's real image, likeness, voice. And as we saw in that big fraud case I just discussed, this is a huge opportunity for people to then target your organization with real, what appears to be real people, right? You might get a call that sounds like the CFO and it not be. So what controls are in your organization? What policies are you implementing to potentially prevent that from happening? So always be aware, don't give into pressure, don't answer phone calls from unknown numbers, stay calm and be skeptical. Always best practices there. Smishing, this is a scam carried out via text or social media. You know, your Amazon account on hold due to a billing issue. I get these periodically and I always go into my Amazon account and try to figure out what I ordered or what the situation is. 90% of the time it's fake, right? Or it wouldn't be coming from this number or in this item. But if you click that link, you know, why are you clicking on the link in your text messages? Are you doing it on, you know, your work phone? Make sure that you're using, you verify independently, stay updated, don't share your personal information, and make sure things are coming from official communications, right? So within here, we have banking scams, parcel delivery scams, account verification scams, contest winner scams. If you didn't enter a contest, you probably didn't win it. So kind of keeping some skepticism out there for that piece. Emergency scams, that was pretty prevalent a couple of years ago. A family member of yours has been in an accident. You know, a lot of times those are targeted to older individuals, grandparents with their grandchildren, that kind of situation. So just make sure before you're sending any money or providing personal information that you're verifying it, if it is a real instance or not. And these can happen over social media too. That's a key part, like in your chats on your Instagram or Facebook. Just being skeptical of any kind of contact with anyone that you don't initiate or someone you don't know, right? And then we kind of get into phishing, spear phishing, and whaling. Phishing is a broader term that covers any type of attack. Spear phishing is targeted phishing. Basically, you pick the key individual that you're going to go after. Whaling is a form of spear phishing that targets high-ranking victims within an organization, your C-suite, executives, owners, that kind of situation. So spear phishing is targeted phishing when you take time to learn about the victim. And I think of the 3.4 billion email and phishing attacks sent a day, this represents probably like 0.1%, I believe it is, of total attacks, but they have over a 55% result in getting money or fraud occurring, right? So they get acted on a lot more than just a general phishing attack. So this is why it's also important to protect your social media information, what information you put out there through your business, social media, websites are all right for the picking for cyber criminals and people looking to defraud and steal from your organizations. So what are you putting out there? What's available to them? Do you know that your CEO is on vacation? And maybe that's the time that they're going to spearfish and send an email to the controller with an urgent need to pay a bill. If you look at the bottom email here, it's from Mary's CEO. Hey, Joe, are you in the office? Kindly let me know because I need you to send out an important payment for me today. Thank you. You respond to that email with no verification from Mary. Maybe Mary's on vacation. What is the policy in place to kind of go around that? Or when people aren't available, you know, I think most of the time caution is definitely the first course of action. You know, how can you prevent this? A big piece of this is educational campaigns. There's companies out there that you can work with in your organization to set these up, see how many employees are actually clicking on this stuff and, you know, kind of use it as an education component to what's out there. You know, the sole purpose is to get in the head. There's like the gift card schemes as well. Like, hey, can you purchase 10 gift cards for me? And here's the banking information I need. Or can you provide me with the banking information so I can purchase these gift cards? If your organization doesn't use gift cards, if you're not the person that normally purchases those gift cards, if your organization does use the gift cards, you know, it's probably not a real situation. So always take a step back, ask someone else, verify, call Mary's CEO and say, hey, I just wanted to be sure that this is actually you. If it's not and you don't do anything, that's great. Just check before you act, right? Whaling is targeting executives or presidents with the hope for a bigger return. You know, educate employees, flag emails outside of the organizations. A lot of our clients will get emails back that actually say, you know, this is from outside the organization as it gets flagged within their system. Always a good thing to be a little bit more skeptical on that piece. Discuss your social media use and policies with your teams. Establish multi-step verification for sensitive data or wires. This is a big piece, right? So if one person gets tricked with two people, right? So using that to kind of help protect your organization, exercise data protection and data security policies, and follow-up phone call or follow-up conversation, right? So what is the policy when you're asking for an errand or a wire? So this example down below is a really good one from the university president. What's that email address? Is that real? Quick task, urgency, like they're always going to make you feel like you have to act immediately. You have no time to think, right? Because when we act immediately, we're not being skeptical. We're not taking the time to process the information. This is requesting gift cards, as I mentioned, for any local store around. So any store you want. That's probably not what you're going to ask for. Or if your organization doesn't do that, once again, a red flag, right? Spelling and communication errors, right? Where are these phishing emails and whaling and spear phishing all coming from? Are they foreign bad actors? Are they local, right? So a lot of times the spelling is a huge giveaway in these types of situations. But always hover over links, double check the email address it comes from. If you're not sure, make sure you're asking someone. So knowing your scams and being skeptical, we talked about that a little bit. Never clicking on communications from unknown sources. make sure your hardware and software is all updated, and where you store your information and how you do it, right? So. Red flag data can teach employees what fraud behavior looks like. Using the data from behavioral red flags to inform fraud awareness training for staff, managers, and other fraud personnel at your organization can be hugely beneficial. 75% of fraudsters displayed at least one of the 8 most common behavioral cases, right? So we have living beyond one's means at 39%. That's the key indicator, right? Is your payroll person all of a sudden showing up in a new Ferrari? Like, what car do they drive? Is there any potential there for that being the situation? And a lot of times this is probably where tips come into play, right? So their coworkers are aware and it's like, hey, what's going on? Did you come into some money? Like, what's the situation here? Financial difficulties, a close association with vendor or customers, control issues. Is that person that's in charge of your financing or bank account unwilling to like let someone else do the bank rec? Do they not want to take vacation? Are they unwilling to show people other information or get really defensive when you start asking questions? All could be a sign of fraud. The wheeler dealer attitude, bullying or intimidation, are they completely unapproachable? Or divorce or family problems. So this key point on the bottom, fraudsters living beyond their means has consistently been the most common behavioral red flag since 2008. So here's just another infographic kind of saying all the other stuff. Excessive internet browsing was only 2%. Social isolation's on there. So you see like the key indicators are really personal, right? So are they having financial difficulties? Are they living beyond their own means? That pressure and rationalization comes into play there. So why is fraud prevention important? Fraud prevention is the process that's aimed to reduce loss in a firm and maintain positive customer service, right? Yeah, so if there was no behavioral red flags, it was 125,000 median loss. At least one behavioral red flag was 150,000 median loss. According to the CFE, U.S. businesses will lose an average of 5% of their gross revenues to fraud. And for smaller organizations, that's a big hit to the bottom line and might not be as absorbable. So every year, the cases keep going up. 7,000 reports of fraud are made per day, and 60% of small business losses due to fraud aren't recovered. So once it's gone, right? This is kind of where it becomes important to look at your internal organization and what you have in place. So the ACFE report to the nations also has this fraud prevention checklist. So just kind of some questions to think about as you're looking at your organization. Each organization is different, size, capabilities, structure, we all have our nuances, but what are you doing in these areas and are you at least addressing some of these points, right? So the checklist is really helpful in kind of evaluating where you are and where you need to go from a fraud prevention standpoint. So is ongoing anti-fraud training provided to all employees or just some? How often do you provide that training? Is there effective fraud reporting in place? Do employees know what to do if they suspect fraud? Who do they go to? Who do they talk to, right? Is there a tone at the top that this is not allowed? Are fraud risks performed to proactively identify and mitigate the company's frauds? Are there checks in place? Are you looking at things, right? How often does the owner or CEO also pull up the bank statement and go through it and look at, hey, that's kind of a unique transaction. Like, do I know what that is? And then asking the questions. The perception of oversight is key here, right? If someone's looking, that kind of takes the rationalization and opportunity away. what, are you doing background checks in your hiring? Although most frauds don't get reported, are there instances that could be questionable in an employment history? Employee support programs, that's a huge thing. Most health insurance policies at this point offer some sort of employee support program. Are you utilizing that? Are employees aware of that? What opportunities are given by the employer to the employee in these situations? The open door policy, do they have mentors? Is there someone that can help in situations where they feel pressures before they become too much, or that they would then go on to commit fraud? And regular anonymous surveys. So we kind of talked about the tips, but is there a pervasive issue within the organization regarding employee morale that would result in possible theft down the road? So a fraud policy raises awareness among staff that response plans have been devised to deal with and minimize the damage caused by any fraudulent attack. You're explicitly defining actions that constitute fraud, and then everyone knows what to do when they see it, right? So is there something in writing? The tone at the top is the key part of any fraud prevention and detection strategy. What is the integrity of management? What are they saying is okay or not okay? This year, an unequivocal statement that all fraud offenders will be prosecuted and that police will assist any investigation. Right there is a huge deterrent for people, right? I don't want to get caught. I'm not going to subject my family to that. So 82%, this is important, like 82% of victim organizations have modified their anti-fraud controls following the fraud. So if they had those in place before the fraud, they probably wouldn't have had the fraud, right? So how are you looking at engaging now before something like this happens? And putting a fraud policy out there is not the hardest thing to do. Probably doesn't take that much time. Quick Google search on the internet would give you something to kind of start with from there, right? So encourage employees to report any suspicion of fraud, and then the steps that would be taken once a fraud is discovered. So fraud awareness training, if employees know what to look for, they'll have that information, right? So fraud awareness training for employees is up from 2016, where 52% of respondents had it, up to 63% in 2024, right? And even for just management. But it's really important that the whole organization knows what constitutes fraud, knows what to be aware of. Those phishing emails and scams are preventable. Maybe not the contact, but informing people what they look like, the newest stuff that's going on in the environment and culture and the cyber world, just provides people with more information that potentially would stand in the way of acting on some of this. So social media, kind of talked about that a little bit. What are you putting out there? Is someone chatting you random questions? Is your pet's names out there? Any password stuff? What are you up to? Where's your organization? This is all stuff that people can take to socially engineer and commit fraud, right? So increase the likelihoods of success of email compromise, tailored phishing email campaign, information on your passwords, information on when you're going out of town or on vacation. All of that stuff is to be, protected in some way, or also just education around it, right? So practicing good cyber hygiene, what are the rules? Avoiding the use of same password for different accounts, strong passwords. Are you using symbols, numbers, upper and lower case? We all kind of know those things now. Are you using password creation items, or suggest a strong password? Multi-factor authentication. Do you need to go and then say, yep, this is me, for critical accounts and stuff like that? I think most banks have that in place now. Are you using that? Your old devices, make sure those are clean. Updating operating systems and apps, make sure you're on the most latest software and updates, and you're installing those updates as they come. So a lot of them include security patches and that stuff, and just staying on top of your cybersecurity, what's going on in the industry, what's going out in the environment, what is, you know, the latest and greatest attack and thing that you can educate within your organization. So this is kind of AI and machine learning. We talked about this a little bit, that example from multinational firm. You can use AI to replicate voices, images, and movements, fake calls, fake emails, fake video calls. It's crazy what's out there, right? Deep fakes are a unique challenge for organizations and individuals. You know, if you feel like you're talking to the real person, but kind of use this as an education tool for your people, right? What is your, you know, internal process to get some of this stuff done? If you have a needed payment ASAP, are you going to hop on a video call? Are you going to use certain words and terminologies that these people might not understand or use, right? And once again, there's no problem with following up and in person or an additional phone call to that person outside of the video call, just to make sure that it's you initiating the call, you initiating the contact, and you're actually talking to the real person that you think you are. So we'll kind of get into some organizational things that you can do within your organization, some controls to put in place. Separate financial duties. This will help prevent any theft from or fraud from, you know, we kind of talked about that asset misappropriation as well as the cyber side, right? So if you don't have access and you need someone else to be able to do something as far as writing and processing payroll, accepting checks, who opens the mail every day, kind of go back and look at some of that stuff. When we look at the weaknesses that contribute to occupational fraud, the lack of internal controls is 32%. So that is by far the largest factor for the ability to commit fraud on occupational fraud. So separate financial duties, you know, do you have dual authorization for purchases and sales over a certain amount? We kind of talked about checks and credit cards and that kind of thing. Do you have dollar amount enforcements on people's credit cards or expense reimbursements even? Are there thresholds in place within your organization that you know what gets flagged and brought up to a higher level? Who's performing the check cash deposits and reconciliations? Who has access to view the bank account? Is there oversight in that area? A lot of times smaller organizations might not have the ability to differentiate, right? So if you're going to have the same person open and process checks and payroll, are they also the people that are entering and, you know, recording credits to the vendors or providing like the calls for AR collections? Who's doing that check on top of them, right? And sometimes that's mitigated by review and reconciliation, right? Performed by a higher level personnel that's not involved in the day-to-day transactions. Financial controls can help managers and owners implement checks and balances, ensures all finance is accurate and free from error and protected from misstatement. So restrict access to financial systems and data. Level of authority, right? So who really needs access to what? And are there capabilities within your systems and processes to limit who gets to see what? Who has access to see the payroll reports? I think that's the key one that a lot of us think about, right? But who has access to look at AR, AP? All employees do not need access to all systems, right? So make sure that the system's also helping you and preventing employees from stealing information or misappropriating funds. Reconcile transactions, you know, check transactions against your bank accounts, including credit cards, cash sales, your own purchases. A lot of times there's just, even on personal accounts, right? We have a miscellaneous credit or your credit card accounts. Everyone's had fraud on their credit card accounts. Businesses are subject to the same thing. Who's looking at that? Is someone at least opening your bank account daily to review those transactions and look and see if something appears suspicious? Making sure that you're implementing those checks and balances to catch something if it is wrong quickly. So maybe you don't have time to reconcile and review transactions daily. So maybe randomly, like, okay, this month I'm gonna look at XYZ. I'm gonna look at all the credits in AR and see if I agree with them. I'm gonna look at, all of our banking transactions and see, hey, what's this Chase card? We don't have a Chase card, right? Or what's this purchase from Amazon? We don't purchase a lot from Amazon, so I'm not sure why that's so high. Oh, we purchased extra paper or something. Sometimes there's a reasonable explanation, but if you don't ask and there's not that perception that someone's checking, you're opening yourself up to potential fraud. Monitor expense reimbursements. So what is your firm's expense reimbursement policy? Are they using personal credit cards or cash to purchase? You should make sure that you're validating back to real receipts, right? How does education play into this component? 67% had a university degree or higher, right? So people that are educated are the ones also committing fraud, right? If you do have corporate credit cards, how is the reimbursement happening? Is there a review of that? Is it automatically paid? Do you have an option to say that this is a personal expense and kick it back to the employees? A lot of times we get down right to the end of the wire, right? Like, oh, I have to pay the bill. I have to, I owe the employee the money. I don't have time to detail check it. We trust them. We're good. How many times can that happen, right? So you approve and make sure you're only paying with the original receipt. There's opportunities and abilities to change receipts, dollar amounts, location. I've seen some gas receipts changed, right? Like, you change the name of the company. It's very easy to manipulate documents in this day and age. So making sure that you're only reimbursing the employee and charging your clients expenses that are real. So we kind of talked about that, comparing receipts. A vendor approval process. How often do you look at your vendors that you're paying? Maybe annually when you do 1099s. What is your process for selecting and adding new vendors, right? So you have a new job, you need to do something different. Who approves those vendors? Who's entering that information to pay those vendors? Is that the same person that's paying them? Do they have an opportunity to create a fake vendor in that process? And maybe it's just an annual or quarterly review. You just want to look at the new vendors and see who they are. Randomize, do something at least for the vendor side, right? Invoices marked as paid when you pay it. Backup records, 2 employees to account cash. Where are your blank checks kept? Does everyone in the office have access to your blank checks, right? All you need this day and age to copy a check is your bank routing number and your account number, right? So keeping those secure and making sure no one that should not have access to them has access to them. Expense limits, credit card expense limits, check limits, right? So who can write a check for what amount, dual signature. Are you implementing enough internally to prevent something from happening down the road? And seek regular independent reviews. You don't have to go through a full-blown audit to see if something's wrong, right? Maybe it's just, hey, you want to look at our vendors, or we want to look at our bank recs for the year. Is anything weird? There's opportunities to do that and engage in different type of a test engagement and a test work that potentially would provide some independent review and process. Positive pay. Do you use positive pay at your bank? This is a huge tool for smaller organizations that could prevent check fraud, right? So you submit a check issued report through the bank verifies the check when presented for payment that it agrees to that list, right? So if you have a check come in that's not on the list, they don't cash it, right? So that prevents that side of it. Most banking institutions have this option out there. Are you utilizing that? Are you training your staff, protecting your passwords, updating your software, backing up your systems, restricting privileges, using multi-factor authentication when available, right? A lot of smaller organizations have to outsource some of their IT services. You might not be able to have a dedicated IT employee. Are you having regular meetings with your outsourced IT? Are you even aware where things are stored or how to prevent some of this stuff? Are there things that they offer as far as training for employees that you could then offer, right? So, regular meetings with your IT services, making sure they have a lot of experience on the latest and greatest in discussions. So making sure that they're involved in your anti-fraud policy and implementation as well. Verbally validate payment instructions, right? It's always best to pick up the phone and communicate with parties. Creating a disaster recovery plan. What are the actions if things are compromised? Do you have that established? Do people know what to do if there is a problem? And then consider an insurance policy. A lot of insurance companies have policies out there that would protect you in case something did happen. So meeting with your agents regularly and making sure that is something that's included in your policy. And then free resources. So the FBI, Cyber CISA, ACFE, AICPA, all have resources out there that are available to anyone, right? So there's the cybersecurity checklist, the internal control best practices, stuff that's there for you guys to use and then look back at your organization and say, yeah, we're doing great, or no, we need a little work in this area. And as always, Dannible can be a resource as well if you have questions when you're going through and implementing this stuff.